Welcome to this week's teaching, which is called Beshalach, which means basically in sending out, meaning when Pharaoh sent out Israel. And I've called it the aftermath of deliverance. So let us now begin. And of course, the Torah portion comes from Shemot, Exodus 13:17 to 17:16. And the Halftara is Shoftim, which is Judges 4:4 to 5:31. And the Brit Chadashah, the Netzarim writings, is from 1 Corinthians 10:1 to 5. So let us now begin with an introduction. In this marvelous Torah portion, we once again get to experience the amazing power experienced by the Israelites as Yahweh delivers them from certain death at the hands of a villainous enemy, bent on their destruction, or at least on their recapture, to expose them once more to the torturous labor they had formerly been subjected to. This great feat is so memorable that each year when we read this portion, it seems to recapture our attention fully. However, today we will venture into the aftermath of that experience and see just why and how they could possibly fail numerous times to trust that Yahweh would provide for them, and see how that may not be limited to their experience, but might give us today something that could challenge us too. So we begin by looking at the list of events within the portion. And of course we begin, the first event is that Yahweh leads Israel via the wilderness route to encamp by the Sea of Reeds, which is called in Hebrew Yam Suf, prompting the Mitzrites to follow. And the second point is that Israel panics, but Moshe calms them and assures them of their salvation. And thirdly, Moshe is instructed to raise his staff, the sea divides, and Israel walks across on dry land, after which the Mitzrites follow. And fourthly, we see the Mitzrites are drowned, and Israel celebrates, after which the tests begin. These include the sweetening of the bitter waters, the provision of quails and manna, the striking of the rock for water. And we must remember all that happened because of their murmurings. And finally, Amalek attacks and Israel is victorious. So let us now begin to look at the glorious timeline of Yahweh. If we can believe that Yahweh is in control of all events, then the claim of Moshe for Israel to go 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to Yahweh is a clue, as it is repeated 3 times. We must also consider that Yahweh surely would not violate his Shabbat. We can therefore say that Passover was most possibly the 3rd day of the week, with them travelling 3 full days and camping by the sea. In Shemot we read, that's Exodus 14:9, and the Mitzrites, the Egyptians, pursued them and all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, camping by the sea beside Pi-hahirot. This then would be the 5th day of the week. That means Friday, 3 days of travel. When then did the deliverance occur? Not before sunset, but rather as seen in this verse. In Shemot, we read Exodus 14:26. We begin reading by reading, "Then Yahweh said to Moshe, stretch out your hand over the sea, and let the waters come back upon the Mitzrites, on their chariots and on their horsemen." And Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its usual flow at the break of day. That means the dawn, with the Mitzrites fleeing into it. Thus Yahweh overthrew the Mitzrites in the midst of the sea. Could this also reflect in Yeshua, the true Passover lamb, who was 3 days in the earth and rising to bring deliverance at the breaking of the dawn at the end of 3 days? Selah, which means meditate on that. The joy of this timeline is that it shows the great glorious rejoicing of all the people over their deliverance, which finally was complete at the breaking forth of the Shabbat, something that only Yahweh could orchestrate. This also leads to the thought that dawn is the start of the day and not sunset. Finally, the entire army of Mitzrayim, Egypt, has been wiped out in a single foul swoop. The Almighty had brought to bear the power of an entire ocean to carry out his will. This is truly epic. And their response, according to the verse, is that they believed. After all this, we could surely imagine that their faith in Yahweh would be at its peak and that nothing could happen that could diminish their faith. Moshe and Miriam then lead in the songs of praise to Yahweh, and we see that in this slide. However, just 3 days after that miracle at the sea, the people become thirsty. They arrive at an oasis of water, but the water is bitter. Instead of them turning to Elohim, we find them coming to Moshe and screaming at him, saying, "We are going to die." And Moshe must urgently seek supernatural help and miraculously save them. He throws a stick that Yahweh showed him into the bitter waters, which sweetens it. But then it seems to happen again, even worse. This time, the people now start to worry about food, and again their faith just seems to evaporate. They say this time, found in Shemot, Exodus 16:3, "If only we had died by the hand of Yahweh in the land of Mitzrayim, when we sat by the pots of meat and when we ate bread to satisfaction." It seems, while they travelled, all was okay, but now we find them arriving in the wilderness of sin. But once they stopped for the Shabbat rest on the 16th of the second month, Ziv, that's the Hebrew month Ziv, they complained again. How do I know it was Shabbat? You may ask. It is by the words of Moshe in Shemot, which is Exodus 16:22. And so it was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. And we know that is after they've been told about the manna. Therefore, the manna begins to fall at the dawn of the first day of the week. I have another question for you. Yisrael had arrived here and complained about lack of meat, even though they had all their flocks. So why could they not eat them? Well, we read this in Vayikra, which is Leviticus 17, 3-4, where it says, any man from the house of Israel who slaughters a bull or a lamb or a goat in the camp, or who slaughters it outside the camp and does not bring it to the door of the tent of meeting to bring an offering to Yahweh before the dwelling place of Yahweh, blood guilt is reckoned to that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people. And that tells us that this was written later by Moshe, but could it be possible that that same ruling already was known, just because it hadn't been written, and therefore they could not use any of their animals? And now we turn to the quails. This helps us, I hope, what we just read, helps us to understand why they clamoured for the flesh pots of Mitzrayim. These quails are heavy birds that fly low in large flocks and bed down before sunset. These are kosher and not listed as sacrificial animals. We also read this, which is mistranslated as with the killing of the lamb for Passover in Shemot, Exodus 16:12b, where we read, speak to them, saying, between the evenings, which should be dusk or dawn, you are to eat meat, and you shall know that I am Yahweh your Elohim. The Hebrew word Erev not only has a meaning of evening, but has the meaning of mixing, to mix, as with mixing light with darkness. Therefore, it relates to the twilight of evening, but also of the dawn. So it's not limited to the evening. Yahweh's provision, therefore, comes out of their grumblings, which then escalates even more in the third incident. Again they were thirsty, and again they have seemed to forget Yahweh's incredible salvation at the sea. They panic again, screaming for water. At this time, look how bad it gets. Moshe, this leader, who took them through the split sea, he actually fears for his life. He turns to Yahweh and says, what am I going to do with these people? If this keeps going, they're going to stone me. Yahweh now stands on the rock, as it says, and instructs Moshe to hit the rock, and water then flows from it. The final story in this week's parashat is unusual, since their faith just seems to come right back. You see, immediately after the people complain about the lack of water and the lack of food, and again about the lack of water, a nation known as Amalek ambushes Yisrael, and suddenly war is thrust upon the people. Their very first battle since leaving slavery. Since their faith in Yahweh seems to have dwindled, and they are in danger of annihilation by this brutal enemy army, we would expect them to crumble, give up, pack their bags, and go back to Mitzrayim, Egypt. But when you read the text, it's almost calm. Amalek attacks, and the people don't panic. It's just like, okay, what's our plan? Moshe draws up a battle strategy. Yahushua or Joshua pulls an army together. The people follow instructions and begin to fight. Moshe goes up a mountain and holds up his staff and hands to Elohim, supported by Aaron and Hur. And the people of Israel win the war and move on with their lives. But what's going on? That is the question. How does faith work? What we now need to do is to try to work out how their faith functioned, because the same reasoning that filled their minds may just be what we struggle with every day, though we may not see it. I would even like to suggest that throughout the whole Exodus story, the people had only seen Elohim in one way, a powerful force concerned with the bigger picture. We saw in Parashat Va'era that Yahweh had an agenda to teach the world that he is the only Elohim, the greatest among the hosts of false Elohim. From Israel's perspective, their freedom could have been an accidental byproduct of Yahweh's agenda. They were freed from Mitzrayim, that's Egypt, because Egypt was destroyed. Yahweh never did anything actively for them. He just didn't afflict them like he did Mitzrayim. In Israel's anguish, they asked this question, which we may find ourselves asking sometime as well, since they say this: is Yahweh with us or not? But I think we are now in a position to see something deeper in this phrase. They are asking, is Yahweh among us or not? Now, do we ever ask that question? We know Yeshua, and then we may ask the question, is he really among us? Is he within us? Does he feel what we feel? Does he have compassion on us? And that's what they were asking. Think about it. A person could have grown up with his or her own economic hardship, but Yahweh Elohim isn't mortal. Can Elohim understand those hardships? Can Yahweh really be close to me? The real question we still need to answer is, do we have faith in a different aspect of Yahweh entirely? The side of Yahweh that cares about my daily, all too human needs? Does Yahweh understand the sorrow and fear that I struggle with every day? Is Yahweh here? Is he right here in my life? After the third complaint, Yahweh tells Moshe, take in your hand the staff with which you hit the Nile, and you hit the rock, and water will come out. Yahweh commands Moshe to take that very same staff and to replicate that action. Hitting the rock in the same way as he hit the Nile is a throwback, a way of saying the Elohim that did all those miracles in Mitzrayim, Egypt, that destroyed so much, that's the same Elohim providing for you right now. And it's even more than that. This staff, which was an agent of destruction, isn't just a weapon of a vengeful Elohim. It is a tool of Yahweh who dearly loves you and wants to sustain you. So we can say today that the same Elohim who through his Son defeated the worst enemy bent on the destruction of all mankind for serving Yahweh, has defeated the enemy. But now that same mighty Elohim through Yahusha or Yeshua wants also to comfort and provide for us in all our needs. Often we think the Master came to save us from the devil and sin, and that was his master plan. But today he wants to do more. He wants to be with us through his Spirit, through his Ruach. But many of us still feel a bit deserted. But we need to see him different, and that is true faith. What does Yahweh want or wait so long to provide water and food for them, since he knows they have run out and are becoming desperate? Why let it get to the point of complaining? Yahweh actually tells us why. It's all in order to test them. Maybe Moshe wants to train them to pass the test, to realize that Yahweh really is with them. Don't complain to me. Complain to Yahweh. He is truly listening. So now, how do we understand true belief in Yahweh? The struggle with faith is not just a matter of cultivating more of it. It's a matter of cultivating a type of faith and a relationship with Yahweh that has complexity in it. Yahweh, the outwardly powerful, omnipotent King and Master, is also the Elohim to whom I matter intensely, who is there with me in my own seemingly small personal struggles. And I just found that in Judaism, there is that difficulty that they treat Yahweh as so holy, we can't say his name, he's so up there. Then how do we make him more personal? It may seem like I'm insignificant to Yahweh, that the Almighty couldn't possibly be concerned with my petty concerns when there is a whole world to contend with. But to Yahweh, each one of us matters, and our seemingly insignificant needs matter. And I believe that's why he represented himself as Yeshua, that we would know that everything that we feel and suffer, he understands. Yahweh clearly demonstrates that to Yisrael over and over again with miracles that are loving instead of destructive. The first and most important thing they need to know as a nation is that Yahweh wants to have a relationship. So now we also need to look in our life and truly look how Yahweh has worked mightily and see how we are working to enrich our relationship with him or not, and not just keep him at an arm's length. Throughout the Torah, we are learning how we as human beings can have a loving relationship with the divine. Our life now then is about recognizing Yahweh as creator, protector, restorer, but also as father and provider, all of which have been made possible by Yeshua or Yahusha, which we know is the ultimate good news that should daily cause us to rejoice. May we never stoop to reacting as they did, but maintain that faith in each area of our life to the praise of him who called us. Amen. And now, as we complete the Torah part of that reading, we also turn to the Halftara, which is Shoftim, Judges 4:4 to 24. We may remember that as being the destruction of Sisera, the army general of the Canaanites, who was killed by just a woman in the tent after his defeat. So let us just review that slightly. And here is our picture. This week's Halftara describes the fall of the Canaanite general Sisera and his armies, who was swept away by the Kishon River, as found in the Song of Deborah, the Song of Thanks. This parallels this week's Torah portion, which discusses the drowning of the Mitzrayim forces in the Yam Suf, the Red Sea, and the subsequent songs led by Moshe and Miriam. And that's why we also have the Song of Deborah. So it's how they joined the two parts. And now we also turn to the Netzarim Ketavim, which is taken from Corinthia Aleph, which is 1 Corinthians 10:1 to 6. And we'll see the significance of that. Shaul, which is Paul, in this reading speaks of self-discipline, not to be disqualified, since we know how that generation that came out of Mitzrayim never entered the promised land. They all were guided by Yahweh's presence through the cloud and the column of fire and went through the sea. The Hebrew legend is that this particular rock followed them in the wilderness, which Paul equates as being Mashiach or Messiah. Only 2 of that generation were permitted to enter the promised land. This, therefore, is meant for us to understand the goodness of Elohim, but also his severity over disobedience in the areas of idolatry, immorality, and complaining, that we may always remain faithful to Yahweh and our Master Yeshua. And as we complete this section, we hope that through it we can gain an understanding that Yahweh is more than just this mighty, holy, powerful, ever-present, ever-knowing Elohim, but he's also the one who is loving, who's a father, who wants to provide for us in our daily anguish and needs. And if we can get that out of this, then we have gained some understanding. So I just want to wish you Shavua Tov Alechem, which means a good week unto you. And may this be a blessing to you as you look at Scripture. Amen.